Decisions that are in the best interest of the communities and the students of Rankin County. Father, we ask you to please continue to guide and direct us as we do your will. It's in your Son's name we do pray. Amen.
Get started with our meeting. We have some reports. As all of you know, we're here to consider mostly the financial impact that settling in the lawsuit with the Pearl Public School District. We have Rankin County School District, and we have several people who have done some studies with us this morning. Kevin, would you like to get started? This is Mr. Kevin Brantley. He's our staff CPA with Rankin County School District. He has a report.
If you look at your handout on page 6, this is the same thing we went over back in April.
This, you talking about?
No, the board meeting. Board book. On page 6, we looked at the impact of losing the annexed area and the 487 students. We looked at local funding, state funding, and federal funding. Mainly we looked at local and state. We don't think there's material impact on federal funding, but on local and state money, we looked at that. So if you look on page 7, that's the ad valorem taxes that we would lose in that annexed area. I went to the tax collector's office and tax assessor's office and got this information. It's almost $1.1 million, and that's for actual taxes paid from October 2010 to September 30th, 2011. So that's probably a little bit more now, but at that time, that was actual taxes paid in those zones. So that would be our local funding that we would lose from that, the annexed area. Then on page 8, we looked at state funding. In fiscal year 2012, this fiscal year, we received a little over $71 million in Mississippi Adequate Education Program money, MAEP money. And it's based on your attendance in months 2 and 3 of the prior year. So what we did is divided that by that number to get an MAEP funding per student, which is at $3,885.40. So then we took that amount and multiplied it by the average daily attendance factor. For the 487 students, our average daily attendance percentage is around 95%. So that would be 465 students. So our loss in MAEP funding would be $1.8 million. Now this is based on projected actual funding, not on full funding. If it's based on full funding, it's a larger amount. But this is what we actually received from MAEP. So we would lose, if we lost those students, we'd lose $1.8 million. And then that third section down there, we're considered a high-growth district by the state. And what that means is if you have sustained growth for 3 straight years, you qualify as a high-growth district. If you do not, if you have negative growth in any one year, you don't qualify for the next 3 years. So we get high-growth funding because we're one of about 15 districts in the state that qualify for that. And it's based on our high-growth number, which is 396 students. So that's another $1,540,000 of high growth money. Because if we lost those students, we feel for sure we would not have any positive growth for that year. So for the next 3 years, we would lose that high growth funding money. So if you take the $1.8 million and the $1.5 million, you come up with $3,348,000 in state money that we would lose. And the high growth would not kick back in, like I said, until the 4th year before we get it again, because we would have negative growth in 1 year. So if you take the local funding loss of $1,063,000 and the state loss of $3,348,000, that's like $4.4 million we would lose if we lost these 487 students.
That's if we lost the 487 students.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, all this is set up is if we lose the students and lose that war, this is what we're looking at.
Yes.
And on the high growth funding part of $1.5 million, that's going forward, or is that this past year? These numbers, would they going forward?
This is based on actual numbers this year. But if next year we lost those students and had negative growth, we wouldn't qualify for that funding, so we would not receive that high growth funding for 3 straight years.
So we're told the high growth funding is going away.
And I haven't heard that.
Were we fully funded this year on high growth?
Yeah, we're about
Right.
65, 70%, which is about $1 million.
We're told by legislators that high growth funding is going away.
I
That's
haven't
not
heard that.
something you can count on. Now, in AEP money, is that actual funding this year, the 71 million?
Yes, that's actual
not-
funding this year. If we were fully funded, it'd be a higher amount, but that's actual funding this year.
Well, this is based on us going to court with Pearl and losing, right?
My projection was based on if we lost this annexed area and we lost these students, 487 students.
What would happen if we accepted the proposal that's on the table now, where nothing changes, we keep the students, we keep the ad valorem tax?
There would, I mean, I don't understand that.
Well, if we, well, Kevin's a financial officer. If we accepted a proposal that left the students in Rankin County, going forward, anybody that moves into that area belongs to Pearl. So we kept the ad valorem tax, we kept the state funding, it'd be a zero wash.
But if those kids go to Pearl, aren't they gonna get some ad valorem taxes?
The ones that go to Pearl, we're doing that now, I understand, right?
For the, yes, the Patrick Farms area, yes.
If nothing changed, there wouldn't be any loss right now with it.
If you don't lose the students and they don't change the, where the taxes are going, like right now, the Rankin County school taxes,
There would be no change.
there would.
If
all the students continued to go to Rankin County schools and none went to Pearl, no, there would not be any change.
In the future, it would work itself out.
Well, in
As
the
these
future, though,
students graduate and
you would still lose funding in the future because you wouldn't have those students.
Right.
And you would lose tax dollars because those taxes would be going to Pearl.
But we wouldn't lose $3 million next year.
Not if you didn't take all of them at one time. Yeah, over time you would lose.
That is, I mean, you would lose depending on what that growth is in that area to begin with. I mean, if you didn't have any growth in that area, these kids graduate, what can you come up with? But what we're saying is our growth in our other areas in Rankin County, we've had growth. When you look back at how much growth was in this area,
I don't know.
that's a question that I don't know if we've got the answer to, but when we're talking about this certain area, what's the percentage? We've been gaining 0 kids, 5 kids, 10 kids to a period. That's the thing, which is hard to tell depending on how people move or do whatever, but your other growth areas throughout Rankin County, you're still going to see growth. There's no doubt. We're going to have growth.
Now, keep in mind is if they get the kids in the future, then you're losing those dollars on the new kids coming in. It's not part of the 487. So
That is a high growth area.
yes,
What is high growth area?
those 2 areas. It's growing.
I don't believe that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Kevin.
Okay.
Before we hear from Mr. Sheriff, our lead attorney, Mr. Ben Griffin, do you have a statement or anything you'd like to talk about?
I do. Thank you, Madam President. I'm going to address their remarks when they're all through. Let me add this real quickly. I've spoken to all of you several times before, most of the time in executive session. This is where it's in the public interest, though. This is now front page information. You're doing exactly the right thing to make this a transparent process. This is a high-growth area that's involved. That means that if you're talking 487 students today, in 2 to 3 years, you're going to be talking 25% more. In 5 years, you could be talking 40 to 45% more. In 10 years, you could double that amount. Yes, sir.
Who's got the numbers?
Your demographer. You've got the best demographer in the country, Dr. Clark, William A.V. Clark. That's exactly what he's saying. That's in his report. That will be his testimony, sir.
He can tell us what the growth's going to be?
Yes, sir. He's a demographer who can look at your existing data. He looks at the census figures. He looks at block-by-block analysis of this precise area. This is the annexation area that was added to the city of Pearl, but is outside of the Pearl Public School District. That is the area we're talking about. It is high growth. It will continue to be high growth. And these are good people. These are good students, but they are Rankin County School District students. Your oath as a trustee is to do what is in the best interest of the schools and the students in Rankin County School District. And I know all of you will do that. What you're looking at is loss of students now and in the future, as the future growth creates a greater and greater financial detriment, impact upon your budget, upon the schools, upon the students. Now let me add one other point. This is so fundamental. Freddie has worked with school districts all of his career, as have I. Schools and school district boundaries are inextricably tied to home values. We know that. That almost goes without saying. If you start even considering a little shift that would be all Rankin giving up and Pearl receiving, and you change those boundaries and you alter expectations of people who have built homes or are considering building homes in Rankin County within what they think is the Rankin County School District for their children to go to Rankin County schools, and they're in for a big surprise when it's not so, there's going to be a public uproar. And I think it's just now starting. And what I think you need to look at very carefully is what happens to those students if they are, after the first year and the second year and the third year, what happens when it finally comes down to the bottom line, which has not been stated by Pearl's attorneys yet. Their bottom line is what they're saying in their lawsuit. They want the students and they want the territory. They say 3 things, and this is very important. They say that they believe they're getting too racially diverse in the Pearl schools. What does that mean? They are saying they are getting too black. That is their lawsuit. These are their words. How do they cure that? By getting what they think is a whiter population base out of these annexation areas, the high growth area. By doing that, they think that will help cure part of their problem. Their other problem is they need the tax base. They say it 12 times in their lawsuit. I've given each of you just an extrapolation of it. This is quoting from their own papers in court. They want the tax base, they want the property, they want the funds that come from it. This is not some innocent, well, we're just going to go along and get along proposition. This is for keeps. And let me add this. When a court has to look at a settlement, the court asks, can it do it under state law? Is it legal? Is it constitutional? No board can constitutionally give up tax funds to another district. You can't donate funds to any purpose other than a legitimate public purpose. And this is not a public purpose authorized by state law or by the Mississippi Constitution. Number 2, when you do this and you agree to this type of transfer, it's a one-way transfer. It's a transfer that goes from Rankin to Pearl. Now, Pearl schools are excellent. Pearl Public School District has a wonderful administration that is on top of its game. They are doing a good job with a very qualified superintendent. I know he is. He's a product of Delta State University. I've got to brag about my local school. And under that leadership, I know he is correct when he says they are financially strong. But in their lawsuit, they say we need the money. We need the tax base, we need the property, and we need the students. And I'm going to cover all of that in a little bit more detail in just a minute. But what you're hearing from Kevin Brantley is the truth. And what you're hearing from me is a projection based on a demographic analysis. That's race, sex, age, population data now, and in 2015 and 2020. Those figures are calculatable, and they are there. You're looking at high growth area. You are looking at what is, it's not a gold mine. It is Rankin County School District property. It is high growth area that will have a heavier and heavier impact on your budget if you give it up now. I'll cover all that in more detail in just a minute, but I want you to hear from Mr. Leslie Shivers, because he's done a very detailed analysis of what I think is the greatest financial impact that will cause harm to your schools and to your school children for years to come if the case were to be settled at this point. Thank you.
Mr. Shivers, before you get started, would you just briefly tell the board what your qualifications and what your background is?
My name is Leslie Shivers. I'm a CPA. My work is centered around public school districts for 34 years. I worked for 18 years with the state auditor's office in numerous capacities, actually out in the trenches performing audits, supervising audits, managing, and my last 10 years I was the director of school audits for the state auditor's office. At that point in time, we were auditing roughly 60 to 70 school districts throughout the state. In 1996, I left the state auditor's office. I went to the Department of Education. I worked for what is now referred to as the Office of School Financial Services. You might ask what my primary responsibilities were. Well, that really depended upon who you asked. If you asked Kevin Brantley, it was a matter of getting what was then the minimum program checks out every month and doing the proper calculations, providing that to the legislature and so forth. Beyond that, mostly it was, again, providing some technical assistance to schools throughout the state. In 2001, I retired from state government. Since then, I've been self-employed as a CPA. All of my clients are public school districts. I do not have a tax practice. Matter of fact, I don't even do my own taxes. But that's where I've been. We'll audit me and my staff each and every year, anywhere from 10 to 12 to 14 different school districts across the state. All sizes, from a small 900 enrollment up to as large as 9,100 enrollment district. So we cover everything from one state to the other of all sizes. So that's a little bit about who I am and my background.
Just to make something clear, you do not do anything for Lincoln County schools?
No, ma'am, that is a true statement. I do not. What I've done, let me put it this way. I'm going to put it in very simple terms. If a public school district gives up land and they give up students, you're going to lose money. All right? Obviously, simply stated, as Mr. Brandon pointed out, there's taxes, ad taxes that go with the assessed value for this land, the annex area that we're talking about. If that land goes to another school district, obviously the taxes associated with that go. I looked at the numbers that Mr. Brandon provided to me that came from the tax collector. I didn't see any issues with those particular numbers. When you move beyond the land and you look at the actual students themselves, it's a simple equation. Students equate to money, and that's just the way it is. The formula for the MAEP, one of the key components of that is simply your ADA. Obviously, as you can imagine, the larger the school district, the larger the piece of the pie they're going to get. The smaller, just the opposite is true. I looked at those numbers. Obviously, it's a simple calculation that we perform. What's the total MAEP funding? What's the ADA? Do the math, come up with $1 per student. That's about the best estimate that we could come up with to get something that would be very precise and accurate. Would probably not be possible because we would have to go to the Department of Education, ask them to pull up their formula, and they'll plug in some actual numbers and play around with the formula. I don't know if they'd be willing to do that and go that far. It's just not practical. But that's simply stated the way this thing is. Has already been discussed. We're really talking about three factors here. We're talking about the ad valorem taxes in that area. We're talking about the MAEP funding that is directly related to these kids, these 487 or 484, whichever number we're going to look at. And then you're also talking about the loss of because you are a high growth district, there are dollars associated with that. Now, granted, we're not fully funded. We're not fully funded for MAP. We're not fully funded for being considered a high growth district, and haven't been for several years. But nonetheless, those are dollars that are tied to these kids that will be lost. It will go. It'll go away. With regard to the high growth, as was indicated, if you have 1 year, put it another way, qualify for high growth, you have to have 3 consecutive years of positive growth. If you have 1 year where you do not have positive growth, then you fall out of that that classification of being a growing district, and you have to have 3 years of consecutive growth again. So that could put you out as far as the 16-17 year before you would ever see any additional dollars for being considered high growth. Now, the other side of this thing, I was provided with a list of the kids. I was provided by grade, by school, and looked at that. Obviously, one thought that comes to mind is, well, if we lose kids, we could probably have a reduction in staff. But there's not a direct correlation to that. For example, if you're assuming a student-teacher ratio of, say, 20-to-1, something like that, we're talking 480 kids, you may be thinking, well, we could probably lose 18, 20 teachers or something like that, but there's not a direct correlation like that because all these kids are not coming out of just, one or 8 or 10 or 20 classrooms, whatever the case may be. They're spread all up and down different grades from different schools. And when I started isolating these kids and looking at the grades and the schools where they currently are, and looking in terms of them being removed, particularly in the elementary area, I'm only seeing somewhere in the neighborhood of about 4 teacher units that you could possibly eliminate, for lack of a better word. Using your average teacher cost for the elementary area, which is including fringe benefits, which is in the neighborhood of $53,000, we're only talking of a cost savings of a little over $200,000. Now, you might possibly, when you get into the secondary area, find some savings there and some reduction of staff. It gets increasingly more difficult to have a reduction in staff in those grades simply because you've got to provide certain courses for certain grades almost regardless. So it gets increasingly more difficult to have some type of reduction in staff in those grades when you have a reduction in kids. So when you put it in these terms of, I'm looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of $4.4 million in lost revenues with something in the neighborhood of $200,000 plus in cost savings, and my operating costs are remaining the same. They're not changing. If there's any desire to recoup that money, the only option that the district has available to them is to increase local taxes. Obviously, the law, as you well know, allows you to go 4% a year with proper notification, public hearings, and so forth. To recoup this $4.4 million that we're talking about, by applying the 4% increase for each year, and again, I'm using your current year as a base for those calculations, it's going to take you 2.5 years or so, 3 years, 4% for the next 2 years, third year something slightly less than the 4% to generate those dollars. I also took those projections and those increases and did some calculations and put it in terms of what does that mean to a homeowner. I just arbitrarily took a home value of about $250,000, did the calculation on that, and it would be somewhere in the neighborhood. We're talking about single family